Sure enough, like every 5 years, they'll pull the lake down 4 or 5 feet to allow homeowners to work around their docks and their shorelines, all that kind of stuff. I just happened to look like 2 days in to this 2 week drawdown. They only hold the water down for 2 weeks, then they let it come right back up. And I told Jenny, I'm like, I have to go down there and look at this. I loaded up the very next morning, loaded up early, drove down there, rode around the rest of that day, spent the night, rode around half of the next day, and come home. I didn't even take a rod with me. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We're at our next stop for the MLF BPT map study breakdown, whatever you want to call it, that we're doing this year. But really going through our stops, and next stop up on the list is, oh, it says it over here, Redcrest. It's my jacket from 2022. Where did we fish that year? What was the 22? Yeah, so it was Grand Lake. Yeah. So the 2022 was on Grand Lake. That's where it was. Where Bobby Lane won on that 22 Redcrest. But for 24, going to a place I have actually never competed on Lay Lake. So this is another, I talked about at the beginning of this series of going to some places that are new for me, or places we hadn't been to in a while, different times of the year, et cetera, et cetera. Lay Lake is one of those for me. I have fished Logan Martin, the lake right above it, once or twice. I fished Weiss and Neely Henry, the lakes up above that, multiple times. I fished Weiss a lot growing up. We used to spend a lot of time there. I fished Lake Jordan down below it. I fished the Alabama River below that. But Lay is actually one that I have never been on. Lay and Mitchell, right below it. A couple of the Coosa River lakes that I have never been on. Except I did do something that I don't do very often, and I went down there and spent a couple days back in the fall pre-fishing. Funny story with that. I had, I'd kind of kicked around the idea of going to Lay and spending, a day or two to go down there and ride around and look at it, just because I have never been there. And I had thought about that kind of off and on, whatever. Hadn't put too much thought into timing when I was going to go down there. Honest to goodness, I woke up one day, got my phone up, read the Bible verse of the day, and I thought, I'm gonna check to see. I know those upper lakes on the Coosa River chain, they pull them down in the fall, just like they do our lakes here in East Tennessee. Not a whole lot, 2 or 3, 4 feet, whatever. They pull them down in the fall for flood control and stuff. And so I thought, I'm just gonna look at it, see if I can figure out when that typically happens. Scroll my phone, find a lake level, and I look at it, and it's got a graph of a year-round graph that looks like it basically always stays the same, except like 3 days ago, they pulled it down like 4 feet. And I'm like, dude, what's the deal with this? I mean, because it is flat, like within a foot, year round, stays the same, except for 3 days ago, it's now pulled down. And last year at this point in time, that didn't happen. What's the deal? So I get searching around. Sure enough, like every 5 years, they'll pull the lake down 4 or 5 feet to allow homeowners to work around their docks and their shorelines, all that kind of stuff. I just happened to look like 2 days in to this 2 week drawdown. They only hold the water down for 2 weeks, then they let it come right back up. And I told Jenny, I'm like, I have to go down there and look at this. I mean, it's not going to be low, most likely anymore between now and our tournament. Um, what's the chances every 5 years? All those kind of things. So I loaded up the very next morning, loaded up early, drove down there, rode around the rest of that day, spent the night, rode around half of the next day, and come home. I didn't even take a rod with me because I know I just expected the fishing would have been really good with the water pulled down, like that when it's not usually, and it would have been very distracting if I would have went and fished. And truthfully, I wouldn't learn anything because different time of year completely for one, um, and we're not going to be fishing under those kind of conditions. Number two, so I'm glad I didn't because I accomplished more without fishing than I would have. Put the jack plate down there a little bit had I been fishing. Um, so that was a cool thing about it. It was really neat to see it with the water down a little bit, kind of get understanding, and there was some stuff that I got to see because of that obviously I won't see when the water comes back up. That I'm glad I was there, to really get an understanding of. I'm gonna start down here at the south end. So Lay is not a huge lake as far as surface acres are concerned, I'm not sure exactly just how many it is, 20,000 ish or so, I think. May not even be quite 20,000 acres, but pretty long lake. And I think I mean, with 40 of us or 50 of us in Redcrest this year, it's going to fish plenty big. And about, give or take, about 45 miles from Lay Dam up to Logan Martin Dam. And I think with the water at normal pool to get to Logan Martin Dam is, pretty much doable, at least be able to get really close to it. So, yeah, so about 45 miles in the end or so. So down here on the south end, it was interesting because I had put in at Beeswax, which is where we will take off, and then started working my way south. And it seems kind of normal, kind of what you'd expect. You're getting a little further down the lake. The lake's getting a little deeper, a little wider, kind of as you go. So it got down here to this part of the lake, and the lake actually narrows up quite a bit. It's on the map. It's called the Narrows, and it really you get to the point down in there where it's a lot of steep banks and a lot of very mountainous stuff. It's kind of a ridge line that comes together there that pinches right into the river channel. And it was unique, to me, just how much it really transitioned from right in that area down south towards the dam. And then I'll say I went to the mouth of that. I believe it's what Waxahachie Creek was about as far down as I got because from there on down it looked like it's pretty uniform. There is another big creek on down there a little bit, right above the dam, and not a ton of offshore stuff. There's some, um, but it looked like everything down in that zone would pretty much be shoreline oriented for the most part. A little bit of standing timber, and that was another thing that kind of threw me off. I had no idea that this lake had any standing timber in it, and it didn't have timber everywhere, but it certainly did have some in some areas. I just was unaware that it had any. So, um, yeah, definitely didn't know that going into it. But yeah, so it was neat to see how you kind of had those transition points of the lake. You had that south end that was pretty steep. A lot of stuff that's basically it comes right out off the shoreline and falls out to 10 or 15 feet deep or deeper even, and then not a lot of hunts or anything out beyond that. Given the time of year that we're going to be there in March, honestly, I don't expect to do any fishing deeper than 10 foot. I don't expect to do much fishing deeper than five, to be quite honest. And that was a nice thing about being there with the water 3 feet low, 4 feet low, like it was. I think most of the stuff I'm going to catch a fish on, I was probably able to see. I could be wrong in that, certainly, but I do think that most of the stuff I'll be fishing was visible. Um, so I was able to really ride around and put a lot of waypoints on stuff that I certainly expect to to be in play. The one part of that I couldn't look at was back towards the back ends of some of those bigger creeks and stuff, because with the water low, I just couldn't even get back in to places that I'll be able to once the water's up. So there's certainly stuff that's back in those a long ways that was inaccessible with the water down. So working your way back north a little bit, you get north of that Narrows area, and that from kind of the Narrows up to about take off there at Beeswax or a little bit above that, you have what I would call that kind of mid lake section where you've got what I would say is typical Coosa River stuff. You've got a lot of flats that come out towards the main channel. Let's look. We'll pull in right here. This is on a little bit of the lower end of that. You've got a lot of that stuff, that right off the main channel, you're looking at a lot of water from, 15, from 5 to 15 is what you've got, kind of right off the edge of the channel. So stuff where if those fish are out a little bit deeper still, they've got a lot of stuff that they can be out away from the channel and beyond that stuff. This is an area here I put a lot of waypoints, some of these back in some pockets and stuff, and just mark different rock piles, anywhere where I saw some natural rock or rock that stuck out a little bit further, anywhere that I marked some brush out on some stuff, mark those with different icons. And that's something I really liked, honestly, about these Apex units being touchscreen. When I mark a waypoint, I can just go change the icon really quickly. Didn't put names on them, but for rock, I would mark it two different ways. I'd mark it one with the rock icon, and then with the red symbol. So I've kind of got two identifiers with it. With brush, similar deal. I'd mark it green, and then I'd mark it with the tree symbol. So it just helps me, as I'm scanning down through there, able to pick out stuff two different ways: rock, wood, and those are kind of the two things that I marked for the most part. So, uh, but being able to just kind of color coordinate that as well as do it with the icons, that's something that's really easy to change on these Apex units. But coming on up here, we're not quite back up to beeswax yet. But this is the kind of stuff, those places out on these flats. To me, those fish will be in some stage of pre-spawn. Certainly, when we're there, there could be some fish getting up close, ready to spawn when we're there in March. But I definitely think we'll be mostly looking at a pre-spawn deal. So places where those fish can get out away from the bank a little bit, where they're maybe not getting pressured quite as hard, and then stage on some type of piece of cover. If that's a little gravel spot, if that's some stumps, if that's a brush pile, those are the kind of places that I expect those fish to set up on. And if they're in a bay, then current really is irrelevant. But if they are, out on the main lake still, the Coosa River has a lot of current that flows through that whole system. So current definitely is a factor with a lot of those places, and some of that stuff is obvious. Some of it you don't have to mark. Those points that really stick right into the current and those type of things. But some of it's a little less obvious. Of course, beeswax. That's where our tournament will go out of, and most all tournaments on lake go out of there. And that's there's tons of fish that get let go in beeswax. I would almost bet anything there will be somebody in the top 10 who probably never leaves Beeswax Creek. I mean, there's just lots of fish that are let loose in there. The Elite Series there last year, uh, Brandon Polinick nearly won, staying there in Beeswax. Of course, the Classic that Kevin Van Dam won was there, so it's no secret that fish get caught in that. But is that going to work on every fish counts over a 4-day tournament like ours? Hard to say. You start getting above beeswax and you really, really notice those flats get a lot shallower. And this was where, with that water down 3 or 4 feet like it was, once you got above there, you really started to where you could see basically everything. The stuff that was out off the edge of the channel or down a little bit, you couldn't. But anything that was up on those flats or from there in towards the banks, lots of stumps that were out like on the river channel or right on that what I'd call a river bar. That was a neat thing with up there was that just how visible everything kind of became, and how limited it was with that water just 3 or 4 feet low. I would I would love for that to have failed when our tournament was, because I think it would um, could make it really good if that water was pulled down a little bit. But I guess that's the way it'll be. You get just honestly a couple bends up from beeswax, and you kind of lose those main channel flats, main lake flats. You really just get into the channel, not much off of that, and then you get on up, and there are some big creeks that come into it. Some that feed in on both sides. And some of those creeks are really large, not necessarily wide, large, but really long. They run miles and miles just in the mapping. I mean, this creek here runs several miles. That's mapped back off the main, off the main channel. So there's definitely a lot of water that you can spend some time with coming up the river. And it looks like to me like a lot of river systems that I have fished, in that it doesn't have those big backwaters like I'm saying. It's got feeder creeks, and that's what those are literally creeks. They truly aren't backwater ponds and backwater sloughs, that kind of stuff you get up through here. Um, Usually in those type of places, fishing becomes very specific. It's not like you just get on this channel swing bank and you start fishing down through there and you're going to catch a fish here and you're going to catch a fish there. Fishing in those type of places gets very, very specific to where this is the corner that you're going to get a bite off of. And the 500 yards either direction of it is no good, and you'll never catch a bass on any of it. Again, it was nice going there with the water low. I hope. It was nice going there with a water low and be able to ride down through there at 30 miles an hour and be like, that's where a fish should be. Pull over, make a waypoint, keep riding. I may ride for quarter mile, half mile, 2 miles before I see the next thing. It's like, okay, that's where a fish should be, and I pull over and make a waypoint. So, really, really glad, especially on this upper section of the lake, really getting into the river, that I was able to find that I was able to spend some time down there with the water down. Now with the water down, I wasn't able to get all the way up to Logan Martin Dam because it just got too shallow down below that. So I hate that I didn't get to see just what that looks like, because even with the water low, it would have been very obvious, I think, to tell where those fish get up there below that dam. But certainly was able to spend a fair amount of time, on that whole system. And so I basically looked at looked at all of the main lake, except maybe the bottom 6 or 8 miles, and then up in those creeks and stuff, I didn't look at every single one of those. But in that, I was down there for about 8 hours one day and 6 hours the next. I spent probably 14 hours on the water. Never put the trolling motor in the water. Never didn't even have a rod in the boat. Just spent that time running, idling, graphing, side imaging, marking waypoints, and I think I've got like 300 and some, 350 was what I ended up. Let's see if I zoom this way out here and it bundles them for me. See just what it is. Yeah, about 350. Um, about 350 waypoints that I marked in that couple of days there. So I don't expect to fish all of them. Honestly, I don't even know that I'll fish half of them when I go back. And that's kind of the learning part of pre-fishing anymore, is just rolling through that and trying to figure out a pattern to it, trying to figure out the pattern that's going on, and if any of it applies to stuff I marked, then good. And if not, don't try to make something work just because of the investment I have in it. Try to fish what's going on right then. But if it does work, look back at this and say, okay, I know a place just like this just around the corner because I've got it marked. So that's the beauty of that. Yeah, Redcrest, certainly excited about it. Excited about this one, honestly, for every fish counts. I think this will be a good place for that. Is it going to be a 2 pound minimum, or will it be a little less than that? I don't know. I think this place, fishing wise, is not as good as it was a few years ago, quality of fish wise, but they do still catch some really good bags of fish there on occasion. So I'm excited about it. I hope we've had some good rain. I hope there's a lot of current flowing down that Coosa, and then big old spots are biting. Those are fun fish to catch, and that's the home. So excited about the Coosa, excited about Lay Lake, and Redcrest being down there this spring.